There was another anniversary of sorts that was celebrated actually 100 years ago as of yesterday into today is the anniversary of the Tulsa Massacre. And this is, we are living in an era where I think that there has been, at the very least, at least in my lifetime, far more understanding and greater awareness of what happened in the years in Reconstruction and post-Reconstruction in this country that have been submerged in terms of the many massacres that have been that took place in this country, essentially with white people angry that black people were getting some form of political representation, some form of wealth in this country. We're talking about really a 50-year period following the Civil War and even after Reconstruction. It culminates in, well, I don't know if culminate is the right word, but the Tulsa Massacre took place in 1921. In the teens, there was a real resurgence. I mean, it had been growing in the post-construction era. But by the time you get to 1920, the KKK had a massive presence in this country. 6 million card-carrying members out of a 100 million population. 6% of the country were avowed KKK members. And I mean, that's it. Maybe it was larger, but so you need to understand that backdrop to what took place with the Tulsa Massacre, and also recall that in the decades prior, really starting in the late 90s, 1890s, the Supreme Court began essentially what we now call as the Jim Crow era. And amongst that was an enormous amount of voting restrictions that were geared towards essentially preventing black people from voting in this country. That era ended in the mid-'60s, and in many respects, and with the passage of the Voting Rights Act, and in many respects has been renewed with the Supreme Court essentially debilitating the Voting Rights Act now 8 years ago.
And we're seeing that play out.
And we're seeing this play out. That's what's amazing.
Right.
So we will start with this clip of a survivor of the Tulsa Massacre. She's 107 years old, I believe.
And Biden met with her.
Viola Fletcher. She was 7. And then we will take a break. And when we come back, we'll talk about those measures that are aimed, or really not aimed. I mean, they're part of bringing back many of the voting rights restrictions that we saw prior to the Voting Rights Act. But here is Viola Fletcher, survivor of the Tulsa Massacre, remembering the event and making the case for reparations. Here it is. She's speaking to the House Judiciary Subcommittee.
I'm a survivor of the Tulsa Race Massacre. 2 weeks ago, I celebrated my 107th birthday. Today, I'm visiting Washington, D.C. for the first time in my life. I'm here seeking justice, and I'm asking my country to acknowledge what happened in Tulsa in 1921. The night of the massacre, I was awakened by my family. My parents and 5 siblings were there. I was told we had to leave, and that was it. I will never forget the violence of the white mob when we left our home. I still see black men being shot, black bodies lying in the street. I still smell smoke and see fire. I still see black businesses being burned. I still hear airplanes flying overhead. I hear the screams. I have lived through the massacre every day. Our country may forget this history, but I cannot. I will not, and other survivors do not, and our descendants do not. When my family was forced to leave Tulsa, I lost my chance of an education. I never finished school past the 4th grade. I have never made much money in my country. State and city took a lot from me. Despite this, I spent time supporting the war effort in the shipyards of California, but most of my life I was a domestic worker serving white families. I never made much money, but to this day I can barely afford my everyday needs. I'm asking that my country acknowledge what has been happened to me, the traumas and the pain, the loss, and I ask survivors and descendants to be given the chance to seek justice, open the door. For 70 years, the city of Tulsa and its Chamber of Commerce told us that the massacre didn't happen, like we didn't see it with our own eyes. You have me here right now. You see Mother Randall, you see my brother, Hughes Van Ellis. We live this history, and we can't ignore it. We lost everything that day, our homes, our churches, our newspapers, our theaters, our lives. Greenwood represented all the best of what was possible for black people in America and for all the people. No one cared about us for almost 100 years. We and our history have been forgotten, washed away. This Congress must recognize us and our history. For Black America, for the white Americans, and for all Americans.
So the Greenwood area that she's referring to is a neighborhood. It was about 35 acres worth of city that was literally bombed from the air. And 300, to the extent that we have any real numbers on this, it is estimated that 300 black people were killed. And it was part of an ongoing, I mean, this was going around the country. Had been going on in the 1890s. We've had a couple of interviews about people, various, similar massacres. And this, the reparations they're talking about here are, I think she's talking about in terms of Oklahoma, but in terms of Tulsa. But obviously, you can extrapolate across. There have been many, many moments in our history where any sizable economic and societal and structural advancements of black people have been destroyed by white people. And that is not even including the systemic and the institutional and the governmental things that have prevented black people from building any type of wealth in this country. Well,
wealth was, a huge part of the Tulsa Massacre. This was known as, colloquially, as Black Wall Street. And there was a reason that this prosperous area of black wealth was deliberately attacked.
Yes. And so something to think about on this
powerful.
June 1st. Yes. Yeah. Amazing. And also amazing when you contemplate, first off, we as a country are lucky to have someone who is 107 years old, who was there at that moment. I mean, I have a 8-year-old son, just turning 8, certainly is aware of the world around him at the time. But it is amazing that it has taken this long for the country to have any type of reckoning as to our past with these massacres. It is stunning. But, you know, thank goodness we had the opportunity to have her there. So, all right, quick break. When we come back, we will talk about what took place in Texas over the weekend, which, at the very least, harkens back to, you know, that same era where there was attempts to disenfranchise, well, not attempts, successful attempts to disenfranchise black voters, people of color, frankly, low-income folks at that time. And what is old is sadly new again. We will take a quick break and be right back in a moment.